Indie games are pretty much games that are not made by a AAA company, and by AAA company, I mean companies like Activision, Ubisoft, EA, and the like. These massive big companies that just crank out games like no tomorrow. Indie games, on the other hand, are games that are often made by smaller teams, smaller companies, and much smaller studios. They will often find funding out of pocket through crowdfunding platforms like Kickstarter, and they are typically made up of people who either have had experience in the AAA industry or are completely new to the gaming industry as a whole. Some indie devs are actually in this sector not because of prior experience, but by self-teaching and having a genuine passion for the craft of game development and game design. Sure, these indie games tend to have lower budgets, though that's not always the case, but don't push them aside for that at all. In fact, there are plenty of indie games out there that are absolutely fantastic, and there are a lot of hidden gems for sure. But the thing is, if you never play indie games, I wager that you're missing out on a huge chunk of the available gaming world out there, and you're limiting yourself a ton. Many of my favorite games of all time are actually indie games. Many games that have left me speechless are indie games. Many games that really impacted me are, in fact, indie games. And many games are indie titles, and you might not have even known that. Indie games encompass games of all genres made by smaller studios. This includes anything from first-person shooters to Metroidvanias to action-adventure RPGs. The thing that links all of these games together is their distance from the AAA world. Many even start out as passion projects. Indie games are typically existent because of a group of people who have a genuine love for the craft of gaming. Now, of course, not all indie developers are in it for the passion, and I'm sure most would agree that they would like some sort of financial reward for their hard work, but many are really truly passionate about what they do. And make no mistake, gaming is a risky industry to try and break in. It's very different from many other industries because the barriers to entry are low, but the competition is extremely fierce. Once you publish a video game, you are instantly competing with Activision, EA, Ubisoft, Rockstar, Epic, Sony, Nintendo, Capcom, the list goes on. And imagine how many huge games come from those studios I just listed alone. You're instantly fighting against the highest level bosses like it's some From Software game. You are thrust into a world where you are subject to the potential harsh judgment of your receiving audience. Indie games take a huge risk because negative reviews could make or break the future of that particular game. Should a game be hit by high levels of negative reviews, it may not retain a player base, and thus the game is a financial loss on all levels. But the potential reward of an indie game making it big is enough for many to take that leap of faith. Indie games can afford to be different and to be unique. They can work towards trying something new. They aren't afraid to stand on their own. The best indie games out there carve a place for themselves in the industry because they experimented with something and curated something powerful. They focused on making amazing gameplay and honing in on their narrative. Because to stand out in a field of titans, you have to know how to reach people. And for that alone, I think if you don't put indie games on your list of games to play, you're very much missing out on an amazing world of games. I've played so many indie titles like Papers, Please, Cuphead, Blasphemous, A Plague Tale, and so many others. And so many indie games I've played like Limbo or Stardew Valley open up a new gameplay experience and interesting stories and worlds to explore. Omori really challenges the barrier by pitching you in the mind of mental health. So many games in the indie world are unique in that sense. Indie games are unique in that they may not be blockbuster budget level games, but they often can deliver a ton of impact in a small package. So I want to talk about 3 specific games that I feel really encapsulates all of this, starting with Papers, Please. Papers, Please is a recent example of an indie game that I picked up. The story of why I bought this game is actually pretty interesting. I decided to take a class about video games as literature in my university. It was just an elective I picked because it sounded pretty cool, and quite literally the entire premise of the class is to play video games, discuss them in lectures, and write like 2 essays connecting in-class topics with the assigned games. One of the games we needed to know about was Papers, Please. In fact, we had a midterm in that class and I had to answer questions about Papers, Please. Something about procedural generation, I'm not entirely sure, it's been a while. But anyways, I got it on Steam the night it was assigned and downloaded it unsure of what to expect. To be fair, we didn't actually need to buy any of the games we discussed because we could just watch playthroughs, but honestly, I'm someone that plays games all the time, so if I get a chance to buy a game, yeah, I'm gonna buy it. As I started playing, I found myself almost forgetting that I was playing for an assignment. Instead, I was actually invested in Papers, Please. I was invested in the story, and I consciously thought about my decisions. I was immersed in this role I was playing, and I loved it. Papers, Please had a rich narrative and an interesting loop of gameplay. It pitted you in a dire situation where every choice you made could be the difference between life and death, where every mistake could end up costing you your life or your family's life. In my first playthrough, I'm pretty sure like almost my entire family, aside from my character's wife, ended up dying. But the point is, every choice I made, every decision that was taken, it had an impact. And this is a feature I've noticed in many indie games that focus on choice. It's the rich narrative that they build around the choice. The ideas of exploring human morality. What are you willing to do to follow the rules? Who are you willing to sacrifice in the name of society? Papers, Please explored many of these themes all through a simple gameplay loop. But that simpler gameplay got complex quickly as you juggled changing rules and ideas every day, and your choices ultimately decided your fate. Papers, Please looks like it's relatively simple, but the game is actually quite complex the more you explore it. You're presented with so many things to remember, and those things can change every day. New rules to navigate, new policies to adhere to, challenges that arise, terrorist attacks that pit you in a difficult spot, where if you fail, it could cost you everything. Papers, Please took a simple premise of a game and turned it into a complex morality simulator, and I absolutely loved it. As an indie game, it really does define itself as one of the best I've ever played. I find it interesting how many endings there really are, and how something as simple as making too many mistakes can trigger certain paths and ultimately end in very different endings. One of the more unique indie games I've played, Pikuniku definitely fools you with its cutesy looks. However, reality shows that the story behind Pikuniku is actually pretty grim and dark. In fact, Pikuniku is actually a game about a dystopian world where you uncover a deep state conspiracy. I'm not joking. You play as this little red guy called Piku, who attempts to help the town be free of Mr. Sunshine. Mr. Sunshine wants to harvest all the land's crops and plans to line his own pockets with more wealth. The puzzle adventure game features some pretty unique puzzles and some downright hilarious visuals. In fact, one of my favorite parts about Pikuniku is the juxtaposition between its story and its art style and visuals. However, Pikuniku's clever in that it sets up a pretty unsettling vibe from the very beginning of the game, with it being clear that something wrong is going on in this world. In order to harvest crops, Mr. Sunshine just distributes free money to everyone in a way to satisfy them. But as you go throughout the world, there are cameras that appear from nearly every building, just watching you and the villagers and civilians. Despite the happy music and visuals, obviously, this world is plagued by something far deeper than that. And honestly, it's a really unique way to deliver such a story. Pikuniku is one of my favorite indie games for this reason alone, aside from the interesting puzzles and the fun platforming that it comes with. Pikuniku, I would say, is one of those indie games that's certainly a must play. There's so much hidden stuff in each level, and there's so much to do, but it's unfortunately a bit short. However, as an experience, I would say it really achieves a lot. Even if its length isn't crazy, the game is impressive in what it tries to do and subsequently achieves. Dead Cells is probably one of my favorite indie games I've had the chance to play recently. It's not really just a game that you can play one time and be done. Dead Cells is likely one of the most replayable games I've ever played in my life. Dead Cells is a roguelike, and the traditional way of playing the game resets you from the beginning every time you die. Although this sounds frustrating, and it definitely gets frustrating sometimes, it's really not that bad. This game is fun, and by fun, I mean it. Dead Cells is almost constant action. non-stop crazy fights, and tons of platforming Metroidvania fun. It's got a unique amount of weapons, neat bosses, and a really cool visual style. I think that Dead Cells truly sets itself apart from other games for these reasons. The premise of Dead Cells is pretty interesting too. You play as the prisoner who's trapped in the prison of an island. Your main task is to kill the king of the island, but every time you die, your body dies, but your head is still alive, and you go right back to the very beginning of the prison. Each area of Dead Cells map offers new challenges, new fights, and cool things to unlock. There are multiple different outfits in Dead Cells that you can get by completing challenges. There's also a lot of references made to other games like Blasphemous and Hollow Knight, which are pretty cool to find throughout the world. You literally can unlock a Penitent 1 outfit in this game, by the way. My sister's a huge fan of Dead Cells, and she told me that the reason she loves this game so much is because it's just a game she can play and enjoy. It's a game that she found you can strategize in, and that it has some level of challenge, but that it's really fun to try new playstyles out with each time. And I found a similar experience myself. Dead Cells is a game that I would call pretty much replayable over and over and over and over, and I'll stop there because I could keep going. I find that indie games tend to have much more freedom in their creative vision. You find that indie games have what some AAA games don't have, not necessarily anyways, but that would be passion. Now look, I love AAA games a lot. Most of my favorite games are from AAA companies, but the issue I found sometimes is just that some AAA games are basically made only for the sake of selling a product. Take this year's Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 for instance. The campaign was abysmally bad. It didn't really need to be a separate game, to be fair. It's really clear that Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 2023 was just a cash grab. I for one do believe that MW2 was meant to be a 2-year cycle, even if that wasn't confirmed. I just believe it makes sense considering that you basically need to download MW2 to play MW3, and a lot of stuff ports from MW2 to MW3. I mean, come on people, the signs are so obvious it's not even funny. This was supposed to be a DLC, not an entirely new game. Anyways, enough of that side rant. I talked about this before, but the reason why gaming feels so soulless sometimes these days is because the industry itself is heavily corporatized. Games by these massive companies are sometimes made just to be products rather than, for instance, expressions of art. They don't care to produce things that make you think anymore, they just want your money. And so they'll up the prices, stuff games with microtransactions, release them half-baked, and then patch them for 2 years before the game is finally playable. Sure, some indie games are also made only for the money, but what sets great indie games apart from those is this passion factor that the teams have. You can just tell when a game was made with so much heart and soul. You can tell when a game means something to the people making it, because it shows. It shows in the gameplay and the story, and in the characters. It shows in the beauty of the game world and the soundtrack. Everything in a game should complement each other, and indie games that are great know how to do that. I could go on and on about so many different indie games that I've enjoyed to the max, but I think I'd be sitting here all day honestly, because there's just that many. And let me clarify something before I wrap this video up. I am not saying that AAA games cannot have these elements. There are great AAA games that clearly do. Red Dead Redemption 2, for instance, is one that immediately comes to mind. What I am saying, though, is that indie games can afford to make these elements clearer because their focus is on the game and not on the idea of the game as a commodity. And this isn't true of all indie devs, by the way. But what I've seen in the past is that some people are quick to pass off indie games because of the word indie. They think it means that the game is bad or low quality. If you're someone who doesn't really play indie games, I recommend that you do go find some indie games to play and that you actually give them a chance. Yes, they're not gonna play like Call of Duty or God of War, but they will be experiences of their own. And yes, they're not made by teams of thousands of devs or whatever, but they are games that do push boundaries on many aspects. I think that players should expand their horizons and try games out there that are different than the usual run-of-the-mill that we always play. Try something different, try some unique games. Don't be shy to play games that may not fit your fancy because they might end up being something you enjoy. This is something that does happen to a lot of people, myself included. And with that being said, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe, like, and let me know in the comments below what your favorite indie game is, or if any of the ones I talked about are your favorites and why. Don't forget to check out our website for gaming news, reviews, entertainment, and more. The link to that is in the description below, and I will see you all in the next video.